"I forgot what it feels like to smile," he once said, and no one in the room had dared to laugh. The city stretched endlessly beneath the glass walls of Ethan Cole's penthouse. 12,000 square feet of silence perched above Manhattan like a throne no one wanted to sit on. The skyline shimmered in gold and steel, traffic crawling like veins of light. Yet inside, everything felt still, frozen, untouched by time, and Ethan stood there in a tailored charcoal suit worth more than most people's rent, staring down at a world he owned but no longer felt part of, his reflection faint in the glass, eyes distant, unreadable. A man who had everything except the one thing no money could buy back. And somewhere behind him, a group of executives chuckled politely at a joke that wasn't funny, waiting, hoping for him to react, to nod, to smirk, to do anything that proved he was still human. But he didn't. Not even a flicker, just the quiet clink of a whiskey glass in his hand as he set it down untouched. The ice already melting, and one of them shifted uncomfortably before clearing his throat. "Great meeting, Mr. Cole," as if saying it louder might crack something open, but Ethan only gave a small, almost mechanical nod, dismissing them without words, and within seconds, the room emptied, leaving behind nothing but echoes and the faint scent of expensive cologne. And when the door closed, the silence returned heavier than before, like it always did, like it had every day for the past 5 years. Ever since the moment everything in his life had quietly broken without a sound. He moved across the marble floor slowly, each step measured, controlled, passing walls lined with art he never looked at and furniture he never used, until he reached the far corner where the city lights reflected brighter, and for a second, just a second, his gaze softened, like a memory trying to surface, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by that same familiar emptiness. The kind that settles deep in your chest and convinces you it's permanent, that this is who you are now, someone who exists but doesn't feel, someone who breathes but doesn't live, and somewhere far below, a burst of laughter rose from the street, distant, alive, real, and Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, as if the sound didn't belong to his world anymore. The next morning came without warmth, the sun cutting through the glass in sharp lines that painted the room in gold. But even light couldn't soften the edges of his routine, because everything about Ethan Cole ran like clockwork, precise and unchanging. From the moment he stepped into his private elevator at 7 a.m. to the exact second he walked into Cole Industries at 7:32, not 7:31, not 7:33. His assistants already waiting, schedules lined up, voices careful, measured, never too loud. Never too casual, because everyone knew the unspoken rule. You don't try to make Ethan Cole smile. You don't try to make him feel anything at all. You just do your job and stay out of his way. And for years, that's exactly how it had been. A perfectly controlled world with no surprises, no disruptions, no cracks, until the day she walked in, carrying nothing but a worn canvas tote, a stubborn kind of warmth in her eyes, and a smile that didn't seem to belong in a place like this, the kind of smile that didn't ask for permission, didn't wait for approval, and definitely didn't know it was about to change everything. The first thing Ethan noticed about her was that she did not lower her eyes. People usually did, whether out of respect or fear or the quiet instinct to make themselves smaller around him. But she walked through the glass doors of Cole Industries like the building did not intimidate her, like the polished marble floors and the silent, watchful staff were just part of the scenery, not a warning. Her canvas tote hanging loosely from her shoulder, her shoes simple, worn but clean, and when the receptionist called her name, Lily Carter, she lifted her hand slightly with an easy smile that felt almost out of place in a space built on control and perfection. And even from across the lobby, Ethan saw it. Not because he was looking for her, but because nothing unexpected ever happened here, and she was, undeniably, unexpected. He stood near the elevator, reviewing a report on his tablet, his posture straight, his expression unreadable, until his assistant, Margaret, stepped closer and spoke in a low, careful tone. "Mr. Cole, the new caregiver you approved has arrived. Human Resources said she comes highly recommended," and Ethan did not respond immediately, his eyes still scanning the numbers, as if the information mattered more than the person, because to him, it usually did. People came and went, employees rotated, Specialists were hired and replaced, and none of it changed anything. None of it touched the quiet, sealed space he lived in. But then Margaret added. She insisted on starting today, and something about that word, insisted, made him pause, just for a fraction of a second, before he finally looked up. Lily was laughing softly at something the receptionist said, not loud, not disruptive, just enough to carry a note of warmth through the otherwise controlled silence. And Ethan felt it before he understood it, like a faint ripple in still water, subtle, almost imperceptible, but there. And for a moment, his gaze lingered longer than it should have, studying her in a way he had not studied anyone in years. Not with interest exactly, but with a quiet, detached curiosity, as if trying to understand why she did not seem to fit into the rigid structure of his world. Send her up, he said finally, his voice calm, even, already turning away as if the decision meant nothing, and yet something about the timing felt different, though he would not have been able to explain why. Minutes later, the elevator doors opened onto the private floor, and Lily stepped out, taking in the wide, quiet space with a brief glance, not overwhelmed, not intimidated, just observant, like someone who noticed details other people missed. And when Margaret guided her toward Ethan's office, Lily adjusted the strap of her tote and knocked once, firm but not hesitant, before the door opened, and she found herself standing in front of the man everyone had warned her about, the man who did not smile, did not joke, did not react, the man who had built an empire and locked himself inside it. And for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still, not because of him, but because of the way she looked at him. Directly, openly, without calculation, and then she said, in a voice that was warm without being overly familiar, "Hi, Mr. Cole, I am Lily. I know this is probably going to sound strange, but I am really glad I am here." And it was such a simple sentence, so ordinary, yet it landed in the room with a quiet weight, because no one ever said things like that to him. Not without an agenda, not without expectation, and Ethan's expression did not change, not outwardly, but something shifted beneath the surface, small, almost unnoticeable, like the first crack in ice that had been frozen for far too long. And though he did not smile, not even close, he did something he had not done in a long time. He listened. For the first few seconds, neither of them moved, as if the room itself was waiting to see what would happen next, and Ethan simply looked at her, his gaze steady, unreadable, the same expression that had unsettled board members and competitors alike. Yet Lily did not flinch, did not rush to fill the silence the way most people did. She just stood there, calm, present, like she had already decided that silence was not something to fear, and after a moment, she took a small step forward and placed her tote gently on the chair beside the desk, her movements unhurried, natural, as if she had done this 100 times before, even though she had not. And then she glanced around the office briefly, not with awe, not with envy, but with quiet curiosity, noticing the details others overlooked, the untouched books, the perfectly aligned folders, the absence of anything personal. And when her eyes returned to him, there was something softer in them, something observant, almost understanding, like she could see the space for what it really was, not just an office, but a place where nothing truly lived. "They told me you prefer things quiet," she said gently, her voice steady but warm, and Ethan did not respond, though his attention sharpened slightly, because it was not a question, it was an observation, and before he could dismiss it, she added, "That is okay. I talk enough for two people anyway." And there it was again, that small, unexpected note of lightness, not forced, not trying to impress, just honest, and for the briefest second, something in Ethan's expression shifted, not enough to be called a reaction, but enough that if anyone had been watching closely, they might have noticed the pause, the fraction of a delay before he turned away and walked toward the window, as if distance would restore the balance he was used to. Lily did not follow him right away. Instead, she moved around the room quietly, setting down a small thermos from her bag, placing it neatly on the edge of the desk, then adjusting the chair slightly, not rearranging, just making space feel lived in. And when she finally spoke again, it was softer, almost like she was speaking into the air rather than directly to him. "I make tea every morning. Nothing fancy, just something warm. You do not have to drink it, but I will leave it here anyway." And the simplicity of it hung in the room, unclaimed, without expectation, and Ethan's hand, resting lightly against the glass, tightened just slightly, because no one had offered him something without attaching meaning to it in a very long time. Minutes passed, quiet but not empty, as Lily continued with small, deliberate actions, checking the schedule Margaret had given her, making notes in a small notebook, occasionally glancing up as if measuring the rhythm of the room. And then, almost absent-mindedly, she pulled out a pen and a small square piece of paper, scribbled something quickly, and set it beside the thermos, not drawing attention to it, just leaving it there like it belonged. And when she stepped back, Ethan's eyes moved too. It, despite himself, drawn by the break in routine, and on the paper was a simple, uneven smiley face, nothing elaborate, just two dots and a curved line, slightly crooked, almost childish, and for a second, the sight of it felt so out of place in his world that it caught him off guard, not enough to change his expression, but enough to hold his attention longer than anything else had that morning. "It is kind of a habit," Lily said when she noticed his gaze, her tone light, unbothered. "I leave one wherever I go, just in case someone needs it," and she shrugged slightly, as if it was no big deal, as if she had not just placed something entirely foreign into a space that had not allowed warmth in years. And Ethan did not respond, not with words, not with a smile, but he did not look away either, and that, in its own quiet way, was the first change. The next morning arrived exactly the same as every morning before it, precise, controlled, predictable, yet something in the room felt different, subtle enough that no one else would have noticed, but Ethan did, though he could not name it, not yet, and as he stepped into his office, his eyes moved automatically to the desk, scanning for anything out of place, anything that did not belong to the routine he had built so carefully over the years. And there it was again, the small square note, sitting beside the thermos, the simple smiley face unchanged, quiet, waiting, and for a moment, he just stood there, looking at it longer than necessary, as if expecting it to disappear once he looked away, but it did not, and behind him, the door opened softly as Lily walked in, her presence carrying that same unforced warmth, like sunlight that did not ask permission to enter. "Good morning," she said, not overly cheerful, just steady, grounded, and when he did not respond, she did not fill the silence with nervous chatter. She simply moved to the side of the desk and replaced the thermos with a fresh one, her movements deliberate, consistent, as if this small act mattered in a way that could not be explained. "I was not sure if you drink it," she added lightly. "But I figured even if you do not, it is nice to know it is there." And again, no expectation, no pressure, just presence, and Ethan felt it in a way that unsettled him more than anything loud or dramatic ever could, because this was quiet, persistent, impossible to dismiss completely. He moved past her without a word, setting his briefcase down, opening it, flipping through documents with practiced efficiency, but his focus was not as sharp as usual, not entirely. Because somewhere at the edge of his awareness, that small note remained, that curved line, that absurdly simple attempt at something his world had long since erased. And when Lily spoke again, it was softer, almost thoughtful. "You know, people think silence means nothing is happening, but sometimes it just means something is waiting." And that made him pause, not visibly, not in a way anyone else would catch, but internally, like a thought brushing against something he had kept locked away, something he did not want to examine. The day unfolded in its usual structure, meetings, calls, decisions made with precision and distance. Yet each time Ethan returned to his office, something small had shifted, the note moved slightly, a new one appearing beside the old, each with a different imperfect smile, sometimes tilted, sometimes uneven, as if Lily never tried to make them perfect, only real. And at one point, when the afternoon light stretched across the desk, his hand hovered briefly over one of them, not touching, just close enough to feel the presence of something unfamiliar, something that did not belong to contracts or strategies or control, and he withdrew it almost immediately, as if even that small moment had crossed a line. Across the room, Lily watched without watching, her attention gentle, never intrusive, giving space where space was needed, but never disappearing entirely. And when the silence stretched longer than usual, she spoke again, this time not to him directly, but to the air, to the space they both occupied. I used to know someone who forgot how to laugh, she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to reach him. Not because they did not want to, but because they thought they were not allowed to anymore. And Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, the smallest reaction, but real, and she continued, not pushing, just letting the words exist. It took a long time before they realized no one had taken it away. They had just hidden it somewhere safe. And for a second, something flickered behind Ethan's eyes, not a memory fully formed, not yet, but the outline of one, fragile, distant, and he turned toward the window again, as if the city below could ground him, could restore the distance he depended on. But the truth was already there, quiet and undeniable. Something had begun, something small, something he did not understand. And for the first time in years, it did not feel entirely empty. By the third day, the pattern had become impossible to ignore, not because it was loud or disruptive, but because it was consistent, quiet in a way that settled into the edges of the room and refused to leave. And Ethan found himself noticing it before anything else, before the reports, before the meetings, before the endless stream of decisions that used to define his mornings. His eyes going straight to the desk the moment he stepped inside, searching without admitting that he was searching. And there it was again, another small square note, another uneven smile drawn in dark ink, slightly different from the ones before it, as if each one carried its own quiet intention, not repetition but presence. And beside it, the thermos, still warm, still untouched, yet never removed. Like Lily understood something he had not said out loud, that some things needed to exist without being used to matter. He set his briefcase down slowly, more aware of his own movements than usual, as if the rhythm of the room had shifted just enough to make him conscious of it. And for a moment, he stood there, looking at the note, his expression unchanged but his focus lingering, longer than logic required, longer than habit allowed, until the door opened softly behind him and Lily stepped in, her timing unforced, as if she had learned the quiet language of his routine without needing it explained. I tried a different blend today, she said casually, moving to replace the thermos with a fresh one, her tone light but grounded. Someone once told me small changes make people notice things they usually ignore. And Ethan did not answer, but something in that sentence stayed with him, not because it was profound, but because it felt intentional in a way he was not used to, like she was not trying to change him, just inviting him to notice. And that distinction mattered more than he expected. The morning unfolded with its usual precision, meetings scheduled down to the minute, voices filtered through speakers, decisions made with the same calm authority that had built his empire. Yet beneath it all, there was a quiet undercurrent he could not fully suppress, a distraction not loud enough to disrupt, but persistent enough to exist. And more than once, his attention drifted back to the desk, to the note, to that simple curved line that somehow carried more weight than any document he signed that day. Around noon, when the office had settled into a rare moment of stillness, Lily spoke again, not interrupting, not demanding, just placing her voice gently into the space. Do you ever wonder what you were like before everything got so quiet? And the question hung there, soft but deliberate, not accusatory, not invasive, just present. And Ethan's hand stilled for a fraction of a second above the page he was reviewing. The smallest interruption in an otherwise flawless routine, and though he did not look at her, though his expression remained controlled, something shifted beneath the surface, something uncomfortable, something real. He did not answer, not then, not with words, but later, when the room fell silent again, his gaze moved almost involuntarily to the note. And this time, his hand did not stop inches away. It lowered slowly, deliberately, until his fingers brushed the edge of the paper, just barely, a contact so light it could have been accidental, except it was not, and he held it there for a second longer than necessary, as if testing something unseen, something fragile. And when he finally withdrew his hand, the room felt different, not warmer, not yet, but no longer entirely cold. And across from him, Lily did not react, did not acknowledge the moment. She simply continued writing in her notebook, giving him the one thing no one else ever had, the space to feel something without being watched. And for the first time in years, Ethan did not immediately push it away. It happened so quietly that if anyone else had been in the room, they would have missed it entirely, just a slight shift in the air, a pause that lingered a second longer than usual, and yet to Ethan, it felt unmistakable, like something inside him had been nudged awake without warning. And for the rest of that afternoon, the feeling stayed with him, subtle but persistent, threading through every meeting, every conversation, every calculated decision, until even his assistant noticed the difference, though she could not name it, only sensing that something in his usual precision had softened, not broken, not lost, just less rigid, like a structure that had learned to bend without collapsing. By the time evening settled over the city, casting long shadows across the glass walls of his office, the building had begun to empty, footsteps fading, voices dissolving into the quiet hum of distant traffic, and Ethan remained at his desk, alone as always. Except this time the silence did not feel exactly the same, not as absolute, not as final, because the small square notes still rested there, scattered in quiet defiance of the order he once enforced, each one carrying its own imperfect curve, each one refusing to blend into the background. And without thinking, he reached for one, not the closest, but the one slightly off to the side, the one he had not touched yet, his fingers closing around it slowly, deliberately, as if the act itself required more intention than it should have. And when he lifted it, turning it slightly in his hand, something unexpected happened, not a full memory, not a clear image, but a feeling, faint and distant, like sunlight through fog. His eyes lingered on the uneven line of the smile, the way it tilted just slightly, imperfect, human, and for a moment, his expression almost changed, not enough to be seen, but enough to be felt. And then, just as quickly, the moment tightened, something closing again, like a door he had not meant to open, and he set the note back down carefully, more carefully than necessary, as if returning it to its place restored something in him. The next morning, Lily arrived the same way she always did, quiet, steady, carrying that same unshaken warmth. And when she stepped into the office, she noticed immediately that one of the notes had been moved, not dramatically, just enough that someone had touched it, and she did not smile at the discovery, did not call attention to it. She simply set down a fresh thermos, placed a new note beside the others, and continued as if everything was exactly as it should be. No, she said after a moment, her voice thoughtful but light. Sometimes people think they have lost something forever, but really, they just have not visited that part of themselves in a long time. And Ethan, standing by the window once again, felt the words settle somewhere deeper than he expected, not as a challenge, not as a question, but as a possibility. And this time, when he turned slightly toward her, his gaze did not pass over her or through her. It landed, briefly but intentionally. And though he still did not smile, not yet, there was something new in his eyes, something that had not been there before, a trace of recognition, of awareness, as if he was beginning to see not just her presence, but what it was doing to the space around him, to the silence he had carried for so long. The day continued, but the distance between them felt smaller, not physically, but in a way that mattered more. And later, when Lily spoke again, it was almost like she trusted the quiet enough to let it hold the meaning. "I think smiles are strange," she said softly, jotting something down in her notebook. "They do not disappear. They just wait until it feels safe to come back." And Ethan did not respond, not out loud, but somewhere inside, something shifted again, a little more than before, a little harder to ignore, and for the first time in years, the silence he lived in did not feel like something he had to protect. The shift did not come all at once, it never did. It arrived in fragments, in moments so small they could have been dismissed if Ethan had not started paying attention. And that was the difference now. He was paying attention, not fully, not comfortably, but enough to notice the way the room no longer felt completely still when Lily was there, enough to register the quiet rhythm she carried with her, steady, patient, unforced, like she understood something about time that he had long forgotten. And it unsettled him more than he wanted to admit, because control had always been his anchor, and this, whatever this was, did not feel like control. That afternoon, the sky turned gray earlier than usual, clouds pressing low over the city, muting the light that usually filled the office, and with it came a different kind of silence, heavier, more reflective, the kind that made thoughts louder instead of quieter. And Ethan found himself standing by the window again, hands in his pockets, staring out without really seeing anything, his mind drifting in a way it had not in years, until Lily's voice broke through, softer than before, almost careful. "Do you ever think about what you would say if you could go back?" she asked, not looking at him directly. Her eyes focused on the notebook in her lap, her tone not probing, just open, like she was asking the question for herself as much as for him. And for a long moment, there was no response, just the faint hum of the building and the distant sound of traffic far below. But this time, the silence did not close the conversation. It held it, waiting. Ethan exhaled slowly, a quiet breath he did not realize he had been holding, and something in his posture shifted, not visibly to most, but enough that the weight in the room felt different. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, but carrying something beneath it that had not been there before, something real. "I would tell her I stayed," he said, the words coming out slower than usual, as if they had to move through something that resisted them. And Lily did not interrupt, did not react immediately. She simply listened, giving the moment space to exist without shaping it. And Ethan's gaze dropped slightly, no longer fixed on the skyline, but somewhere closer, somewhere inward. "I would tell her I did not walk away that night," he added, quieter now. And though he did not explain further, the meaning settled heavily in the air, not sharp, not loud, but deep, like a truth that had been carried for too long without being spoken. Lily closed her notebook gently, not rushing, not turning it into something larger than it was. And when she finally spoke, her voice was softer than ever, almost a whisper. "Sometimes we remember things in a way that makes us carry more than we actually should." And Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, the familiar instinct to close off flickering back for a moment, but it did not fully take hold this time. It hesitated, like it had lost some of its certainty, and instead of turning away completely, he stayed where he was, present in a way he had not allowed himself to be in years. The room fell quiet again, but it was not the same silence as before. It was different now, layered, holding something beneath the surface. And after a few moments, Lily reached into her tote and pulled out another small piece of paper, drawing quickly, her movements familiar, almost ritualistic. And when she placed it on the desk, she did not say anything. But this time, the smile she drew was different, not just a simple curve, but a slightly uneven line with one side lifted a little higher. Like it was trying, like it was not perfect but still there. And Ethan noticed, of course he noticed, and when his eyes moved to it, something inside him shifted again, not breaking, not opening fully, but moving, undeniably. And for the first time since she had walked into his world, the silence between them felt less like a wall and more like a space that could eventually be crossed. The change did not announce itself. It never had. But this time it arrived with something heavier attached to it. Something that pressed quietly against the edges of Ethan's world until it could no longer be ignored. And it began the moment Lily did not walk through the door that morning. Because for the first time since she had entered his routine, the space felt incomplete, not louder, not chaotic, just missing something that had become unexpectedly constant. And Ethan noticed immediately. Though he told himself it was nothing more than a disruption in schedule, a simple absence that would correct itself, yet his eyes still moved toward the desk, toward the place where the thermos should have been, where a new note should have waited, and there was nothing, just the clean, untouched surface he had lived with for years, and it felt wrong in a way he could not explain. The hours passed with the same structure, meetings, decisions, conversations that required his attention, but his focus slipped more than it should have, his responses coming a second too late, his gaze drifting back to the empty desk. More often than he realized, and by midday, even Margaret hesitated before speaking, as if sensing that something was off. "Mr. Cole, would you like me to check on Miss Carter?" she asked carefully, and Ethan's answer came faster than expected. No. Sharp, immediate, almost reflexive, but it lingered in the air afterward, heavier than intended, and he exhaled quietly, adjusting his tone without looking at her. "She will be here tomorrow," as if stating it made it true. But she was not there the next day either, or the day after that. And with each passing morning, the absence grew more noticeable, not because anything dramatic had changed, but because the small things had disappeared, the notes, the quiet presence, the steady warmth that had begun to reshape the silence he lived in. And without it, the room returned to what it had always been, controlled, precise, empty. Yet now it felt different, not neutral, but lacking, like something important had been removed without warning. On the fourth day, Ethan stood at his desk longer than necessary, his hand resting lightly on the surface where the notes used to be, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular, until something caught his attention. A single piece of paper tucked slightly under the edge of a file he had not moved in days, and slowly, almost cautiously, he pulled it free, unfolding it with more care than he would have given any contract or document. And there it was, a smiley face, but different from the others. The lines slightly steadier, the curve more intentional, and beneath it, written in simple, clear handwriting, a sentence he had not expected. Some smiles take time, but they always find their way back. And for a moment, everything else faded. The office, the city, the years of silence he had built around himself. And all that remained was that small, fragile message. And the realization that she had left it there before she disappeared, not for anyone else, but for him. Something shifted then, not quietly this time, not subtle or gradual, but undeniable, a pull he could not rationalize or control. And before he could stop himself, he reached for his phone, his voice steady but carrying something. Knew as he spoke, find out where she is. And when Margaret hesitated, surprised by the urgency in his tone, he added, softer but more certain, please, and the word lingered, unfamiliar yet sincere, as if it had been waiting just as long as everything else. And as Ethan stood there, holding that small piece of paper in his hand, the silence around him no longer felt like something to protect, but something he was finally ready to leave behind. The address was not what Ethan expected, not a polished apartment overlooking the river or a quiet brownstone tucked into a wealthy neighborhood, but a small community center on the edge of the city, the kind of place most people passed without noticing, its paint slightly worn, its windows warm with soft light that spilled onto the sidewalk as the late afternoon faded into evening. And for a moment, he remained in the car, his hand resting on the door handle, his mind unusually quiet, not calculating, not preparing, just present, as if something inside him understood that whatever waited beyond that door did not require control, only honesty. When he finally stepped inside, the air felt different, lighter somehow, filled with the low hum of voices, quiet laughter, the soft clatter of cups and chairs, simple sounds that carried a kind of life he had not allowed himself to be part of in years. And then he saw her, across the room, standing near a table where a few people sat, her sleeves rolled up, her hair slightly out of place, smiling as she handed someone a cup of tea, the same kind she had left on his desk every morning, and the sight of it, so ordinary and yet so full of meaning, stopped him where he stood. Lily noticed him a second later, her expression shifting just slightly, not surprised exactly, but thoughtful, as if she had known this moment might come, and for a brief second, neither of them moved, the distance between them holding everything that had not yet been said, until Ethan took a step forward, then another, each one slower than usual, less certain, but more real. You left, he said finally, his voice quieter than it had ever been in that office, stripped of authority, carrying something unfamiliar. And Lily met his gaze calmly, not defensive, not apologetic, just honest. I did, she replied softly, setting the empty cup down beside her, her hands resting lightly on the table as if grounding herself in the moment. Some people need space to find things on their own. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, not in frustration, but in recognition, and for a moment he looked away, his eyes dropping to his hand where the folded note still rested, the paper slightly worn from being held too tightly. And when he looked back at her, something in his expression had changed, not completely, but enough to be seen. I found it, he said, unfolding the note slowly, as if showing it mattered. I do not know how, but I did. And Lily's lips curved just slightly, not into a full smile, but into something softer, something that carried quiet understanding, and she stepped closer, closing the distance between them without hesitation. You always could, she said gently, her voice steady. You just needed to believe it was still there. The room around them faded into the background, the quiet conversations continuing, the soft sounds blending into something distant, because in that moment, everything narrowed to the space between them, to the weight of what had been lost and what was beginning to return, and Ethan felt it clearly now, not as a distant flicker, but as something present, something real, and before he could stop himself, before he could analyze or control it, something inside him shifted fully, finally, and his lips moved, just slightly at first, uncertain, like they were remembering emotion they had forgotten, and then, slowly, unmistakably, he smiled. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but genuinely, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deeper than habit, deeper than expectation, and Lily saw it immediately, her eyes softening as she held his gaze, not reacting with surprise, not making it bigger than it needed to be, just acknowledging it for what it was, something real, something earned, and Ethan let out a quiet breath he did not realize he had been holding for years, the weight in his chest easing in a way that felt almost unfamiliar, almost impossible, yet undeniable. And as he stood there, in a place he never would have chosen before, surrounded by a life he had once ignored, he understood something he had not allowed himself to see, that what he had lost had not been taken from him completely. It had only been waiting, quietly, patiently, for the moment he was ready to feel it again. And when he looked at Lily once more, the smile still there, softer now, but steady. His voice carried that same quiet certainty. "Thank you for reminding me." And for the first time in years, it was not the city below that made him feel alive.